your take on the night so far? How are things going? Obviously,
well, it's a little early, but I think it's going to be a long night for the Republicans. It's a midterm election. There's kind of a perfect storm. I mean, let's be honest. The Democrats ought to win. You've got an unpopular president with an unpopular war. You've got a scandal that broke in the last, 5 weeks of the campaign. And you've got a GOP that's abandoned a lot of principle when it comes to fiscal issues, when it comes to McCain-Feingold, education policy. So
when you refer to scandal, you're talking specifically the Foley thing?
Well, you know, not only Foley, but really what's happened since the revolution of '94 is, for lack of a better description, we've turned in from the party of principle to the party of self-preservation. Not just Foley, but the party itself, and you can go down the Abramoff scandal and all of that. They behaved like the Democrats did when they held Congress for 40 years.
Right.
Anything to stay in power. And the voters are smarter than that, and they see that. And so I think a lot of conservatives out there are saying, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
And that's what I'm saying.
I was reading a thing today that, you know, part of the '94 Republican Revolution, they were going to put in 12-year term limits on congressional service, and it's somewhat ironic that we're at the 12-year anniversary, and some of those people, including Gil Gutnick, look like they might be having a rough night of it.
Exactly, and they did get some success in putting in term limits on committee chairs. But that's a pretty good example of what you're talking about. You had a number of guys, Nethercutt in Washington said, well, I didn't mean term limits for me. So, you know, places like City Pages, for instance, and the general media are so liberal that if you're going to succeed as a Republican, you need to rise above the cacophony of kind of this media bias. And to do that, you better be drawing a distinction between your opponent and yourself. And if you start to blur those distinctions and you start to behave like your opponent, I think it's a kiss of death, and I think that's precisely what's happened here.
What about, well, but they've already called Klobuchar for defeating Kennedy. What do you attribute that to?
You know, I hate to sound like the mainstream media, but I got to say I think it's the war primarily. You had Mark Kennedy. You should have done better by all objective analysis, staying at 34%, his base the whole time. I mean, from the spring, the summer, the fall, and didn't budget. And I think, you know, the Democrats ran a pretty sophisticated stealth campaign. We know what they're against. They're against the Bush. They're against the Iraq War. Now we're going to find out what they're for.
A Democrat majority in the House, I think most people think, is that good for Jason Lewis?
Well, if I wanted to be cynical about it, it's a lot easier to beat up on the opposing party, I suppose. I really think, from a real sincere philosophical perspective, I actually believe some of this stuff. I think it's also good if all of the trends hold and the Republicans take it on the chin tonight. I think it's good for the Republican to say, you know what, you can't take things for granted. You can't just sit there and govern and hold on to power. What you've got to do is you got to please your base. And I still think the real unreported fact of this is a demoralized GOP base. Okay. So in that regard, I think it might be a good time to retrench. Remember, you wouldn't have Ronald Reagan if you didn't have Jimmy Carter. So
the Republicans spent a lot of time trying to make Mike Hatch look like a guy with a out-of-control temper who isn't fit to govern, and in the last 72 hours, he went out of his way to help them with that message. Is that the deciding factor in that race?
Well, I don't know. I think if Mike Hatch prevails, you're going to find out what Jesse Ventura and DFL clothing looks like. You know, a lot of talk about critics of talk radio and critics of conservatives being angry white males. You're going to have an angry white male in the governor's mansion if Mike Hatch wins the election. So it'll be good for City Pages. It'll be good for Jason Lewis. I don't think it'll be good for the state.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Enjoyed it.
It's fun.
You bet. Take care, guys.